Hola! Hola, amigo! Hola, mi amigo! Hola, amigo! Hola, mi amigo! Por favor, uno momento. Hola, vecino. ¿Te gustaría venir conmigo a la iglesia el domingo? Mi iglesia es muy dorito.
Dorito?
Divertido y se puede transformar tu vida de pecado. Pecado. not pecado, but pecanos es muy delicioso. See?
See, I
See?
don't even know.
See?
I don't even know what you're saying.
You speak English.
Yes.
You're not a Spaniard.
Well, I'm a quarter Hispanic, but I don't speak the language.
Seriously?
Yeah,
Seriously?
I never learned the language.
Seriously?
What were you saying?
Never mind.
Good morning, real life. How are we doing? Doing great. I love that. I love that energy. My name is Megan, and I am one of the pastors here at Real Life, and I get the privilege of teaching you guys today. Some of you might recognize me. I sometimes play at wineries around town. Kind of a big deal, so maybe you've seen me out there. But most likely you've actually seen me leading worship here at Real Life, which I enjoy doing. I've also been able to lead out at Brewster one time, so Billy, we need to probably figure out a time to do that again. So I want to welcome Brewster into the service today, as well as our online viewers. We are one church, but we have multiple different locations. So we're here in Chelan this morning, but we also have a part of our church that is in Brewster, and then also our online community. We have a lot of people that are tuning in from all over the nation and the greater Chelan Valley, so I just want to make sure everybody feels welcome here this morning. If you are new to Real Life, you might not know that we are a church that exists to help those who are far from God find real life in Christ. And so what you might notice is this morning we kind of do things slightly different than some other churches. From music that we choose, to the way that you're greeted, to the types of things that we talk about. We really exist for those who might otherwise not feel super comfortable in church. Maybe didn't grow up in the church, maybe you did, things didn't go well, and you're kind of slowly working your way back. Wherever you are in that church journey, we just want you to know that you belong here this morning. That we want you here, and we're so glad that you've joined us. Like Pastor Graham said, I feel honored to be able to step in and support Kyle and his family as they are processing the grief of the loss of his brother, Kevin. And so our staff is really incredible, just the way that they rally around the Plews and their family. And so I'm so excited I get to be here with you this morning to support Kyle, but also to talk about our series that we're in, which is called Superfans. I'm so glad that my kids get to grow up in a church like Real Life. It's just such a unique, vibrant, fun church experience. My church experience, not that it wasn't great, my parents are here this morning, not that it wasn't great, wasn't necessarily fun, I'm just going to say that. I grew up going to a church called the Glory Barn. Here it is. Doesn't that look like where all the fun happens? I mean, they got that rainbow. Maybe there's a pot of gold there. I didn't look for that. But anyway, this is the Glory Barn. I grew up in Sultan, Washington. If some of you are tourists or you're just visiting this weekend and you stumbled in here, you passed by it, probably didn't know it, probably didn't want to know where you were, but that is where I grew up. And I grew up going to church at this beautiful place called the Glory Barn. To be fair, my parents were first-generation Christians. And what I mean by that is we don't know of anyone else in our family history, as far back as we can go, that were super fans of Jesus. We just don't know of anyone. My dad and my mom were the first super fans of Jesus. So I don't even know if they knew what they were really looking for in a church when they were trying to figure out where they were going to take their family. They were just, hey, we're Christians now, so I guess we go to church. The Glory Barn was really the only game in town, so we didn't have a lot of options. They weren't like church shopping. And so I'm just going to paint a picture of what my kind of childhood church experience was like. Really sweet, awesome people. I'm just going to start with that. But most of the women wore kind of floor-length denim dresses, most of which they made by themselves, which honestly was really impressive. They were actually really good at that. I would say most of the kiddos were homeschooled, nothing against homeschool at all. It's just homeschool back then was a little bit different than even it is now. And so, yeah, we had no drums either. Drums were a big no, you cannot do that. And as I was reflecting on that, I was like, can you imagine real life without Paul Hunter, our drummer? Like, is Paul Hunter the guy where you meet him and you're like, oh my gosh, who let that guy into church, right? Like, he's the most stand-up, like, I love that guy. Or Jared or Graham, like, you guys play drums? You can't go to the Glory Barn. You know, that was kind of the culture. It was just a vibe. It was just different. But even as I look back as a kid, with all of that kind of stuff going on, it still felt like a very safe place. I have fond memories of going there, and my parents took us there almost every single Sunday. And the real miracle of that was that my parents took us there every single Sunday. Like, that was not where our family was going. That was not the trajectory of our lives at all. I remember a story. My mom was a sorority girl. She loved being a sorority girl. WSU, go Cougs, right? She was a Chi Omega. I remember her telling me, you know, she's like, I told your dad early on. I said, you can do whatever you want. I really don't care. I'm not going to tell you you can't do that or do that thing. She's like, there's only one thing you cannot do. Please do not become a Christian. The number one thing she said, and the number one thing that he was like, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to do this. My dad was one of those overnight super fans of Jesus. He went to a rally, altar call. It was like an overnight thing. My dad was a super fan. He did his life completely different. And I'm super grateful for that, because I wouldn't know Jesus. I wouldn't have become a super fan of Jesus without my parents' story and without them just deciding, hey, you know what? This is what we're going to do for our family, and this is the way that this is going to go. So 42 years later, my parents are still super fans of Jesus, and their daughter is up here now preaching and teaching to you guys. And there's something really beautiful about being a super fan. That's the series that we're in, this series right now is Superfans. We're in this, and when you become a super fan, you want everybody to know, right? If something's happened to you, if you've changed inside, or if you've come to believe in something that you never used to believe in before, you're really energized by that, and you won't stop talking about it. That was my dad. That was our family. And so this series is asking us this question: what are you a super fan of, and why? What is it about your life? What are you passionate about? What can you not stop talking about? What are the areas of your life that you're just like, oh my gosh, have you heard about this? I am so into this thing. Pastor Kyle, for the last few weeks, has been kind of sharing his sports fandom. He's been sharing a graphic. I don't even remember what his sports teams are. Forgive me, Kyle. And so I thought I would put together a super fan board of my own. Now, just so you know, I'm not a huge sports fan. I'm married to a huge sports fan. My 13-year-old son is a huge sports fan. I like it, but I am not like, woo, you know? So none of my things you're going to find a jersey for. Nobody's going to buy tickets to the things that I think I'm a super fan of. It's not a multi-billion-dollar business here, but here are the things that I'm a super fan of. Yeah, that first one is real exciting. People jump up and down, right? They can't stop talking about it. I'm a super fan of sleep. I am not ashamed to admit that. I think I was born tired, and I don't know if I ever really woke up. My mom would say that I would just disappear. I would go put myself down for a nap, or I'd somehow figure out how to crawl into my crib. That was me. I've even joked with our small group here at Real Life that I was thinking about getting a tattoo on my forearm of just a low battery symbol. And so when people are over, that's just it's 9 o'clock, and I'm like, whoa, would you look at the time? I gotta go to bed. If you've made it in friendship with me, if you were in the inner circle of my life, if you're hanging out and everybody's having a good time and all of a sudden I just disappear. and I go to bed. That means I trust you because that's just the way I'm wired. I'm a super fan of sleep. That's the first thing. Second thing, you see that little like color wheel? That's the Enneagram. Love it, hate it. There's a lot of people who have a lot of opinions. I love it. I can't stop talking about it. It's almost annoying, and I know that, but I can't stop. You know that feeling? I love it. It's a personality tool, and it basically has helped me discover like how I tick, why I operate the way I operate, and not just me, but everybody else I'm in relationship with. It gives me language for like, oh, wow, I experience this way, and you experience it that way. I didn't know, that's so different. It's so incredible. My friend Kelsey and I, she's a licensed Enneagram. She's a certified coach. She coaches people in town. We made little connection cards based on the Enneagram. I love it. I am a super fan of the Enneagram. And then you're going to see this circle, the barn. For those of you who are not local, that is our local gym here, our local CrossFit gym. I love it. It's the most beautiful gym I've ever worked out in. It's like you walk in, you're like, oh my gosh, it's owned by 3 women. You can tell. It's like, I don't ever want to, can I just move in? Like the yoga studio is beautiful. But I do CrossFit at the barn. And the joke goes, you know, how do you know if you met somebody who does CrossFit? Don't worry, they'll tell you. They won't stop talking about it. You won't miss it, right? That's another kind of annoying thing. I wouldn't say I'm that kind of CrossFitter. I slowly eased into it. It's been like 10 years almost of me doing it. I used to cry in the parking lot before I would go into the workouts because I was so like overwhelmed. Like that should have said something to me, but instead I'm like, I'm doing it. I'm gonna go work out. Like I don't know where that came from. But now I love it. I love it because it's revealed to me these areas where I'm actually stronger than I thought I was. I'm more capable in areas than I thought I was. So I'm a huge fan of CrossFit. I'm a huge fan of the barn and the people who run that. And then that last one are some books. Yep, super exciting. I know, you guys, there's no clap, nothing. Okay, great. But anyway, books. Yeah, thank you. Somebody loves books. Good job. The kids in the front. I love books. If you've been to my house, I have like a library lounge, and I have 4 shelves of books, and they are color-coded according to the rainbow. It's one of my favorite places in the whole house. I'm constantly reading 3 or 4 books at a time, mainly nonfiction and theology, which I know y'all are like, right, who doesn't, right, who doesn't? I'm a super fan of books. All right, so there's me in a nutshell. So while Kyle and I, and probably you and I, have very different things on our superfan boards, there is something that I share in common with Kyle and a lot of people here on staff at Real Life and a lot of people who volunteer in our life groups, is that I am also a super fan of Jesus. I am a super fan of Jesus. And I am not actually a super fan of Jesus just because my parents decided in the 80s that they wanted to become them. That helped, for sure. That was important. It's an important part of my story. But I didn't, inherit their faith. You know, it was something I had to decide on my own. And I'm also not a super fan of Jesus because it's made my life wildly easier. It hasn't. There's a level of sacrificial love and a lot of elements that go into actually walking like Jesus walked and being the kind of person that he was. There's some elements of it that are not super easy. I am a super fan of Jesus because I am self-aware, I guess, enough to know that I come from a really, really long line of lost causes. I come from a family, a generational line of people who struggle with adultery and alcoholism, mental illness, pain pill addictions. You name it, I think we did it, and I think we did it for a really long time. I'm a super fan of Jesus because even though we didn't have church history in our family, I did know I needed the rescue of something bigger than myself. And what I've found is super common with super fans of Jesus is they all kind of get to that point in their life in a very similar way. I think that super fans share this in common. At some point, we get to the end of ourselves, and by God's grace, we find Jesus waiting there for us. We weren't expecting him, most of us. And all of a sudden, we're like, whoa. All of a sudden, this is something that I want to be a part of, even if that wasn't our story before. And maybe some of you here, you've never even thought of God like that. Maybe you're like, yeah, that's great for you. I'm glad you had parents that did that and all of that, but I don't think about God. He's not really on my radar. It's not something I spend a lot of time thinking about. Can I tell you something that's really, really cool about the Christian faith? About people who follow Jesus? You don't have to have him on your radar. for him to already have you on his. The Bible says that he knows the hairs on your head. The Bible says that he actually prays for you, even if you're not praying to him. The Bible says he knows the amount of your days, that he has intimate knowledge of how you were formed and how you were created. This is the kind of God that knows you. It's pretty incredible if you actually believe it. Superfans of Jesus are usually people who know that they can't actually get to God close enough to him on their own. The biggest superfans of Jesus that I've met, they know they are super sinners. And they own it. They're honest about it. They're like, my gosh, I know, me a Christian? Oh my gosh, me a pastor? It's hilarious. God has a sense of humor. And it's true. The biggest superfans of Jesus, I think, know that they are super sinners. And that list would include the very first superfans of Jesus, the disciples. There was this group of guys, 12 of them, that followed Jesus around, and they were in this category. They were in this like unexpected, oh my gosh, I can't believe God picked those guys. That's kind of the story of where we're going to go. The first superfans of Jesus, those who were the closest to him, those who knew if he snored or not. Isn't that interesting? I mean, they spent that much time with him. They talked with him. They were superfans because Jesus actually looked for them when everybody else was looking anywhere but at them. There's this little book, it's called Jesus, A Very Short Introduction, and it is true to its name. It's literally like this thin. If you are interested at all in Jesus or Christianity, I recommend it. It's written by Richard Bauckham, and this is what he said. He said, it was part of Jesus' understanding of his mission to pay attention to those whom most people brushed aside or scolded. It was to them especially that the kingdom of God belonged. And I believe this is really evident in those very first groups of people that God decided to invite into his circle. But before we spend some time kind of unpacking who these disciples were, what their context was, even some of their personality, there's something really unique about Jesus and his ministry while he walked the earth. Because he didn't just have 12 disciples following him. Those weren't the only people that were following Jesus around as he was teaching and living his life on the earth. There was actually quite a big group of people that would kind of follow him depending on where he was and came to listen to him. Now, why is that unique? Why is that significant? Well, because at this time in history, there was kind of this hierarchy, there were these pockets of society that were higher, that were more important than other people. It's kind of a caste system. So you had your political people, the Roman government. You had the religious people who were way up in the Sanhedrin or in the synagogue. And then you just had the wealthy and the elite. And those were kind of the people that ran the entire social society of the time. And most of those people that were high up in the religious sector, the people that they would call rabbis, which were their teachers, those people only taught to very specific, qualified people. So they taught in private synagogues, private temples, private homes, private places of worship, but they would never, ever just let anyone come listen to their excellent insight and wisdom. Like they had to earn the right to sit under these kinds of rabbis and these teachers. And Jesus was the first in all of history, particularly coming out of the Jewish religion, that was like, no, we're not going to do it that way. He would go out in the mountains. He would get into boats. He would sit on the shore. He would go to the bad parts of town. He would talk to the people that nobody talked to. While he had his 12 disciples that were his pupils that he was teaching specific things, everybody had access to who he was. And this gets lost sometimes in the church. Sometimes we can see that get kind of tossed upside down, and we're like, well, that's interesting. Biblically, everybody had access. Everybody had access to what Jesus was teaching. Now, who were these groups of people? I'm going to go quickly, but here are some groups of people that had access to his teachings. Maybe you'll find yourself somewhere in this list. First were his disciples. We'll talk more about them in a minute. But then there were these common people, the nobodies. People didn't make enough, didn't know enough, didn't live in the right neighborhood, didn't do the right things. These are women, children, people that just were on nobody's radar. They were able to come and listen to one of the most renowned rabbis and teachers in all of history. And he said, yeah, take a seat. Listen. Then there was also Torah teachers. So these are the best of the best. The people who told all of Jesus' disciples they couldn't study under them, they're sitting and they're listening and they're hanging on his every word. Then you've got these groups of people back then, like the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They're the rule keepers and the rule breakers. They're the people high up in religious society, the ones who are doing everything right and pointing out where everybody else is doing something wrong. And then you get the Sadducees, where they're actually more like the Sopranos, like they're like the mafia. Like they were way up in like the religious like culture of the time, but they were like extorting people for money. They were like uber wealthy, and they would sit around and they would listen. They would ask questions. And then you had the rich elite. These are the celebrities that would sit around, right? They were like, woo, did you see so-and-so in the crowd listening to that Jesus guy? Well, that's interesting. It's more interesting to see them than maybe even to see Jesus. And even his opponents. The Bible says that there are people that would come and listen to him just to catch him saying something wrong so they could turn him over to the authorities. Isn't that fun when you go out and you like have that person there and you know that that's what they're there for? They just want to catch you in something. Imagine if that was just like, yeah, okay, sure, you can come. You can listen. Try to find something wrong. Do whatever you need to do. Jesus opened up his teaching to everyone. Everyone. And this is what superfans do, right? This is what people who have experienced something, this is what they do. They want everybody to know about it. This is why it's important for those of us who know Jesus, who actually know him and spend time with him, to talk about what it's like to know him. It's important that people actually like, are you really legit? Is what you believe in actually somewhere evident in your life? It's important that we talk about it. This is also true in the Bible. It says in Romans 10, 14 through 17. It says, but how can people call for help if they don't know who to trust? And how can they know who to trust if they haven't heard of the one who can be trusted? And how can they hear if nobody tells them? And how is anyone going to tell them unless someone is sent to do it? The point is, before you trust, you have to listen. But unless Christ's word is preached, there's nothing to listen to. So like Kyle said last week, Jesus' invitation was to everyone. But to his disciples particularly, he just said, hey, come. You'll see. Just follow me. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know where this is going. Just come and follow me, and you will see. So who were these first super fans of Jesus? Those 12 people that most people, when we think of those disciples, we think of those 12. Here's a picture of them. We'll go through this list pretty quickly. We've got Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew, James, different James, two different James, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas. All right, I'm not going to unpack a lot of specifics about them, but that's who you might know. If you grew up in the church, those are the disciples you're aware of. What did all these guys have in common? I think they had two things in common. The first thing I think that they had in common is that they were failures. They were failures. Strictly in the spiritual sense. Like I said, they came from a super religious upbringing. The higher up you were in the religious society, the more power you had, the more authority you had. Jewish kids had to go to school starting at the age of 6 to learn to memorize the first 5 books of the Bible. When they were 10 years old, they were tested. And only the ones who actually had all of the Bibles memorized, all those first 5 books, were able to go on to the next higher level of education. They took this wildly seriously. And none of the guys on that list made it to that higher education. So really, they were all rabbi school rejects. None of them made the cut. None of them were smart enough in the spiritual sense to actually have a rabbi teaching them. So they were failures. But you know what's really cool about these disciples? Is that even though they were failures to everybody else, when they decided to follow Jesus, they gave it everything that they had. They left everything to follow him, to see what this guy was about. And in fact, as the early church began to take shape, which all of these disciples had a hand in planning the church that we know of today. They all had their hand in what it looks like, how it was formed, how it was developed. And here is how it is described. Peter and John, 2 of those disciples, here's how they are described later on when they're operating in their ministry. Acts 4:13 says, when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized they were unschooled, Ordinary men, they were astonished, and they took note that these men had been with Jesus. The only authority these guys had came from the time that they spent with Jesus. They became these extraordinary humans where even teachers themselves were astonished at how much they knew because they were dedicated to being a super fan of Jesus and actually doing the things that he was doing. Some of you might know my education story, some of you might not. When I was 17 years old, I decided I know exactly what I'm going to do with my life. I'm moving to Hollywood, I'm going to be famous. Yes, that was the big plan. I wanted to be a musician or an actress. I didn't know. Give me anything, I'll do whatever. So I moved to Hollywood, and as you can imagine, when you move before your senior year in high school, you don't do your senior year in high school. So I moved down there. This again is before the internet and everybody was going to online school. I joined this online school called Family Academy. I honestly didn't know if it was legitimate until a few years ago when I tried to find a transcript, and it is. But I graduated high school. Thank God, everybody relax. I graduated high school. I got my diploma just in the mail one day. I'm like, yay. And so in between auditions, I was going to Pasadena Community College, and when I moved back from Hollywood, North Seattle Community College, and I was trying to cobble together these credits so I could get my undergraduate degree. And then I met my wonderful husband, and we were off to the races, started having kids, and little by little, I kind of saw that dream starting to fade away. And I don't know what it was. My parents didn't do this to me, but I had such an amount of shame for not being somebody who had her 4-year degree. Like when people would ask me, like, hey, where'd you go to college? I'd be like, oh my gosh, my husband, he went to UW, and he graduated there. Go Dogs. I would just I don't want to talk about that. I was embarrassed by the fact that I didn't have that. So a few years ago, I was preaching at a church that my husband and I helped plant on the west side a while ago. And I was preaching, and I finished, and the lead pastor called me the next day, and he said, I have amazing news. I'm like, great, what is it? He's like, there was a professor in the audience when you were preaching on Sunday, and his name was Gary Brashears, and he's a professor at Western Seminary in Portland, Oregon. And he wants to invite you into his cohort. It's this master's cohort. You sit right under him. You get this amazing teaching. He's in his 70s. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You really should apply. And I was like, that is so awesome. It's great. Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I can't. I'm busy. I got kids. We got no money. I'm not going to do that, right? So I said no. Didn't tell them the real reason why, because I didn't have an undergraduate degree. I just said, no, that's fine. It's not going to work for me. And Gary kept asking me, kept being persistent. He asked me the next year. I said no. He asked me the next year. And then eventually he kind of caught on that something was up. And so he called me and said, hey, Megan, have you ever heard of this thing called an undergraduate exemption? I'm like, no, I don't know. I never heard of that. Nope. He's like, well, it's a really long, arduous process in which you have to put together an undergraduate exemption portfolio. You have to prove how many hours you've been in ministry. You have to get personal recommendations. You have to write these insane essays. And then we put it before all these really intelligent academic minds, and then they either approve or deny you get in without having your undergrad. I'm like, okay, great. I would love to do that. So I spent all this time doing that. Submitted that, didn't know what was going to happen. Then I get a letter from the Dean of Admissions that says, congratulations, you have been admitted into this master's program. Your undergraduate has been exempt. We don't need it. You know why that happened for me? Not because I was wildly intelligent, because I had proven myself and I'd gone up through the ranks of what I had to do. It was because a man named Gary Brashears saw something in me, and he said, you know what, I'm going to vouch for your character. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the board, and I'm going to talk about you. He credited his authority and who he was to my bankrupt account. That's what Jesus did for these guys. That's what Jesus still does today. And in November, in a few months, I graduate with my master's with a 4.0. But I tell you that story because there's a vulnerable piece of that. I want you guys to think that I'm like this, woo, I got a master's, yay. I want that. Who doesn't want that? But the truth of the matter is, I didn't get there on my own. God's like, hey, I'm going to actually throw you a bone, girl. Let's get some education. And not only get you some education, but some of the best under the best professor I can provide. And that's who Jesus is for each and every one of us. On paper, I was a failure. On paper, I was a dropout. On paper, I was ineligible. Can I tell you some really good news? Jesus does not look at your credentials. He looks at your potential. Every single one of us. Some of you have a gold star system for yourself, right? You've got these gold stars in your brain. I'm like, doing good, oh, I'm not doing good, doing great, He doesn't have that. He has no scorecard. Some of you, you're drawing your identity, whether you're a Christian or not, from trophies that you had in your past or grades that you've gotten or the way that people look at you. God doesn't look at that. There's a freedom in being a super fan of Jesus. He doesn't care about your marital status. He cares about the pain you've gone through. He's watched you. He's been there every step of the way. But there's no requirement for that. Your tax return, he won't ask to see it. Your criminal record, the one you hope nobody finds out about, he already knows and he says, come on. The most amazing thing about this Jesus is that he looks at your heart. He actually sees straight into who you are and who you could be, and he says, you, come follow me. Come learn about who I am. Come learn about the limitless amount of love that I have for you and all of your failures. 1 Samuel 16:7 says, the Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. I believe this is why you can trust him. I believe that this is why his invitation is worth responding to. It isn't about who you need to be, it's about who he already is. So, those disciples, they were the first people to experience sitting under the teaching of someone they didn't deserve to be sitting under. They got to experience what that was like when God said, hey, you, come on. I paid the way. I made it possible. Come, learn from me. So what did these guys have in common? They were failures, and then what else did they have in common? They were ordinary. What a stellar resume we've got going on so far. Failures and ordinary. I'm going to go down a list. I'm going to kind of unpack a little bit of who they were, a little bit of their personalities. A lot of them were fishermen. Maybe you know that. A lot of them were fishermen. Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas. I got a lot of this information from John Maxwell's book called 12 Ordinary Men. And so if you have any disagreements on these lists, you can take it up with John. I will not be responding to your emails. But anyway, Peter, Andrew, James, John, all of them. And in those parentheses, we can pick out of the scriptures a little bit about their personalities, right? Peter was brash and loud. Andrew was quiet. He was always in the shadow of Peter. We have James. He was from a well-to-do family. John was narrow-minded, unbending, reckless. Philip, unsure of who Jesus was. Bartholomew, sometimes called Nathaniel, he was prejudiced. He didn't like the town that Jesus came from. Thomas was the pessimist. He was cynical. He always poked holes in everybody's plan. Okay? These were working class, rough around the edges. They worked long hours, tough laborers, and very opinionated people. These were the first people that God decided to stack his team with. They had been friends for a long time. They go way back. But what's interesting about this list is these people actually aren't like socially offensive people. They were very established as fishermen. They were just tradesmen, just doing their thing. But then we see God adding these very surprising picks into the mix. Very surprising. I asked my husband, I'm like, who's the most surprising NFL draft in the last, few years? He's like, well, Brock Purdy. 2022, he was drafted dead last, and then he just went to the Super Bowl. These next guys are those like, whoa, those are doozies of picks, Jesus. Are you sure you want to do that? Yeah, all those fishermen were absolute dropouts and failures and had no business being in the religious sector, but these people had even bigger problems than that. So we've got Matthew as a tax collector. He was a national traitor. He was Jewish, and he was supporting the Roman government. Nobody liked him. Nothing worked out for that guy. Then we had Simon the Zealot, so he was an extremist. He believed that everything God needed to do was politically motivated. The zealots would go into the Roman center and they would have daggers and they would just start killing people that were up in the Roman Empire, trying to take it over by force. And then you've got these unexplained, obscure people that nobody really even talks about, James and Thaddeus and Judas. How did he get in there? A lot of the things we just don't know. But this group of people, they were social pariahs, unimportant, probably oversensitive, sorry, Thaddeus, deceptive to the point of murder, and forceful. And this is who Jesus was like, I know this is going to go really well. Put all these blue-collar guys with all of these politically hyper-focused, angry, confused, that's going to be great. No problems at all. No problems at all. Why in the world would these guys put up with each other? Why? What would keep these guys together? One article I read, it said this. It said, Jesus coming up to the disciples would have been like LeBron James saying to a junior high student, hey, I see a lot of potential in you. Would you want to come and do some training with me? That was the honor. That was what Jesus was extending. He was highly respected, not by everyone, but everybody was curious, is he actually the Son of God like he's claiming to be? I think sometimes in Western culture, we paint Jesus like this weird hippie guy that just wanted some friends to tour the country with, or he's looking to put together a frat house, and they're doing magic tricks, and goofing off. That is not at all what Jesus was doing. What he was doing is he was putting together a collection of people that actually represented those he came to save. That's what he was doing. The outcasts, the off track, the has-beens. So what was in it for the disciples? What did they get out of it? They saw something in Jesus that they had never seen in anyone else, and they wanted to be like him. At its simplest, discipleship is the art of imitation. It is the art of walking after a teacher. So for those of you who've never studied Jesus, you're like, well, what was he like? Why did everybody want to be like him? What was he doing? I'm going to read this list real quickly. Jesus healed the sick. He raised the dead. He restored hope. He fed the hungry. He reestablished social outcasts. He spoke to the unclean. He pursued the unwanted. He walked on water. He loved the unlovable. He called out injustice. He advocated for the poor. He gave hope to the hopeless, and ultimately he died for the sins of the world. But maybe the most incredible part of his entire story and his entire mission is how this all came to be. What he did was he took a ragtag team of ordinary failures, and he used their daily faithfulness to start a movement, one that is still going on today, one that is still happening in this very room. So what does this all mean? Why do I give you this history lesson? What are we doing here? Every week we do these next steps, and we just give you something that you can take throughout your week to ponder, some action steps, something to take all that you've heard and actually putting it into practice. So my first next step is for those of you who are here today, maybe you've never read your Bible, or it's been a long time. Maybe you don't know a whole lot about Jesus, but you're sort of interested. Here's your next step. Consider becoming a superfan. Just think about it. Consider becoming a superfan of Jesus. Learn more about who he is. We have 4 rhythms here at Real Life that we kind of base a lot of our programs around and what we do outside of Sundays. They are learn, invest, follow, and engage. And that first rhythm is learn. The good news here about Real Life is we don't pretend to know things. We don't do that to each other. Instead, we say, hey, I got some questions. I'd like to learn more. That's more the culture that we have. And a lot of our learning happens in our life groups. Sarah Barnes leads our life groups, and that's where you can bring your questions, you can get connected to people outside of a Sunday, and really get to know, what does it all mean? Who is he? How do I follow him? So if you want to learn more about who he is, I encourage you to stop by the Connect desk outside on your way out, talk to Sarah Barnes, get connected into a life group. Or if you've been at this for a long time and you've never led a life group, could you help? Could you show the way? Could you be somebody who leads something that other people could be a part of? And the next step, too, this is for those who are already super fans of Jesus. Maybe you've been a super fan of his for a while. Here, I hope this doesn't sound harsh, but I just want to be really honest. Here's your next step. I invite you to get clear. Do you like Jesus? Or do you want to be like him? I think there's a little bit of a difference. The disciples, they may have been unimpressive on paper. They might not have made the cut at the synagogue school, but they gave it everything they had once they gave over their entire lives to Jesus. Saying that you like Jesus, but that you don't really need to be like him is like me paying all this ridiculous amount of money to the barn and never showing up to a single class. So just ask yourself, are you cheering Jesus on from the stands, or are you actually in the game? And then the final step, you've heard us talk a lot about it, but I encourage you, if you have been a super fan of Jesus for a short period of time, or maybe for a long time and you've never been baptized, I encourage you, get baptized. Sign up on the blue card or the app. It's symbolic. It's been happening for centuries of you just telling all of us, hey, I'm a super fan of Jesus and I want people to know. I don't know what all that means, but I want to stand up in front of you and I say, hey, I want to learn. So I encourage you, fill out the blue card or the app, let us know, and get baptized on August 11th.